All right, and we have the pleasure once again of welcoming back to the show Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, newly reelected Mayor Frank Jackson. Let's first of all, just for a lot of people who aren't really familiar with the process or how that works, just tell everybody what the experience was like campaigning and running for reelection and all that good stuff.
Well, campaigning is part of the process. Councilwoman Lewis used to say there's a difference between getting here and being here. And what she meant by that, the getting here part is about the campaign. How do you get elected? The being here part is about governing, being able to govern and do your job and be effective at it. And so in order to be able to govern, you have to be able to get here, which means you have to be able to campaign. And campaigning is interesting process in and of itself because when I was a councilman, it was easy to stay in touch with everybody because that's what a councilman does. You answer calls, you walk around, you hold meetings. And because it's a defined geographical space, a ward. But when I became mayor, that kind of went away because there are layers between a mayor and the average person. And a mayor just cannot go out every day and have those kind of communications and meetings that a councilman can have because we're looking at governing at a different level and running an entire city, not just running a ward, running an airport, running a utility company, whether it's the water or the sewer or the electric company, running a police department, a fire division, collecting waste, all those kinds of things, doing economic development and community development. As a councilman, you really don't have those kind of responsibilities. And you're able to be more in touch with people because it's a much smaller geographical area and the governing process is different there. Mm-hmm. So those who want to get involved, it's a very easy process to get, technically, all you got to do is be a registered voter, I guess, and by charter, which is our Constitution, describes what the rules are, and you can get a petition, get them signed, and you can run for whatever you want to run for, but then you got a campaign. And a lot of people fail on that part because they don't know how to campaign. But you do have to talk to people, and you do have to have a basis for being out there. And just because you have great ideals and doesn't mean that people are going to support you if they don't know you. People have to know you, they have to trust you, they have to believe that you can do whatever it is that you're proposing to do.
And I know that this is you've been through this process before, and politics can get rough and tumble. So how are you able? It never seems like you take any of this stuff personally, the things that people say about you or anything like that. How are you able to balance that and to be able to campaign but also not take this stuff personally?
Well, I tell you, in politics, you just can't cross the line. And once you cross the line, it gets to be personal. And if you make it personal, I'll take it personal. But professional campaigning, people just should not cross that line. And when they do, you just chalk that up. You know who you're dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. And so to me, it's more about not me, but like my family has to hear things. And so as you know, gentlemen, it is not just on the campaign side that you get this crossing of the line or the misinformation or not disclosing the full story to the point that you have half a lie or half a truth. That happens daily with the media. Mm-hmm. It happens daily. And because they attempt to form images and impressions and betray you as one thing or another. So you don't have to wait for a campaign for those kind of things to happen. Even in the whole governing process, you'll get the same thing, but that's usually from the media, or it could be somebody with ambition, as a couple of my opponents in the primary were elected officials in city council. They spent 4 years on the Florida Council having conversation about how bad the mayor is and what the mayor is not doing and all this other kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they had no substance to them, and the people recognized that.
So speaking of the governing part, when you were on the show before, you mentioned that Cleveland has a bright future, but the work was not done,
right,
and there were still more things to do. Let's talk about that. Let's look ahead to the future. What is next now that the campaign part is over and the governing process begins? What's next?
Well, there is nothing new in the sense that there's a panacea waiting, or some new initiative that is going to be, that is not going to happen. We have gotten to the position of having a good and a bright future because we put the work in. And I put the work in for 12 years, and we've come a long way. And because of that work that we put in and the things that we've done, some popular, some not, some easy decisions, some difficult decisions. We now have the opportunity to have that bright and good future. Without all that stuff that has been done, we would not even have the opportunity. But we're going to build on that. And we're going to take what we've done and we're going to get it over that hump and get it into the point where we have institutionalized this pathway to success, and to create a situation and environment in Cleveland where everyone can participate in the quality of life and the prosperity and opportunities that we have created thus far and will create even more of going forward. That's when we'll become a great city. Right now, we're a successful city. And what that means in essence is we're going to continue with our education reform and making sure that we do better there than we've done in the past. Even though we make significant strides, we still have not gotten to the point where everyone is able to have the quality education that they have a right to, and that we have the responsibility and duty to provide to them. We're going to continue to look at our economic development strategies and initiatives, not just in terms of creating jobs and career opportunities, but also in terms of wealth creation, so that everyone, the best way a community can provide for itself is to have wealth, to own something, to have the power to give a job, the power to allow for a career, rather than asking someone else to provide a job for yours or give your child an opportunity for a career. We should be doing that for ourselves, and that's a key component to people being able to truly participate in quality of life, prosperity, and opportunity. And we're going to continue to work on public safety as a holistic approach, not just the law enforcement side creating criminals or putting people in jail. We can do statistics on that, and I guess to some people that'd be sufficient for them because they're not the ones going to jail. But if we're going to look at really the resolution of what causes crime, particularly violent crime, we're going to have to deal with those underlying things that are not associated with law enforcement in and of itself, but more associated, again, with education, jobs, career, wealth creation, being part of the system to the point that you have a stake in it, as opposed to not caring what happens to it because it is of no benefit to you. Okay? Those are the three major areas. Now, other things come off of that. Other things come off of that. Now, and you have to remember that these things are important and priorities, and they change based on the situation and circumstances of the moment. Something that can be the most important thing in the world can become the least significant depending on the situation and the circumstances of that moment. And that thing that is the least significant can become the most important depending on the circumstances of the situation of that moment. And it could be some offshoot of the three things I mentioned, or something completely independent of what I mentioned. It could be. So is a moving target. And that's why when people are, when you're governing, you have to have the ability to know what the issues are, what are the relevant decision-making points in those issues or concerns are, and then you have to be able to make the decision to address that, even though they may not be popular and people may misunderstand what you're doing, and they may even almost cross the line with you. But if you intend to do the right thing, and we're in a situation and position to do that, it's our duty to lead in that regard, to do the right thing, not to cover our own political behinds or create political security for ourselves. Most elected officials have a difficult time putting themselves out there like that. Mm-hmm. Well, people in general, I guess, too.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. And actually, speaking of that, I know we got a couple more questions here. I know Eric wanted to ask a couple of things about public safety, so we'll do that in a second. But one of the things that you were talking about, making decisions, and sometimes that they're popular, sometimes they're not. It was one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about on the last episode, but I heard you speak about it at the Real Black Friday event. And you actually won me over on this particular issue. So I wanted you to say it to the audience and give your perspective on that. And that was the dirt bike track.
I knew you were going to.
Yeah. And your philosophy on it was, I was kind of ambivalent to it before I heard what your thought process was, and you won me over on that. So I want you to.
Let's start off by just recognizing the fact that riding dirt bikes in the street is illegal. It's just illegal. Why they're not street legal. They're off-road vehicles, whether they're a dirt bike or a four-wheeler or whatever they may be. They're illegal. You can't ride them on the street because they're not street legal. They don't have those things you need to flashing signals and headlights, tail lights, and mirrors and all that other kind of stuff. So let's first recognize that. And then you can get them to be street legal by investing in those things like flashing lights and headlights, tail lights, and mirrors. You can do that. But even if you were able to make them street legal, it's against the law to do wheelies. You still can't run red lights and stop signs and cut people off and do reckless operation of a street legal vehicle, right? You just can't do that.
Right.
And so let's start off by recognizing that to be a fact. The issue with me is not to justify the illegal nature of riding a bike. The issue to me is more about the demonization of those who ride bikes in a sense that does not allow them full access to the opportunity of the sport. If you remember at Black Friday event, I asked people how many of them saw on TV or have gone to motocross race with dirt bikes, and quite a few people raised their hand. And I asked them, when you go to these arenas or stadiums with tens of thousands of seats, how many of them were empty? And they said none of them. So that gives you the magnitude of the sport itself. It's like NASCAR racing. You just don't have the bike and the rider. They, just like on that bike, that NASCAR, they have all that advertisement on the uniform of the driver. They have all that advertising. That's a lot of money.
Right.
Well, it's the same thing with dirt bike riders, right? They got on the bike and on their uniforms and their helmets, they got all this advertising. It's a lot of money. And then it's not just the rider, it's the crew. The people who maintain, the people who repair, the people who build, the people, all of these kinds of things. And you have a rider and a bike, but there's a big support system around it. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars in this sport. It's no different than any other sport. It's a lot of money associated with it. And the question becomes, then why cannot our young people participate in that side of the opportunity? Why do they have to continue to be part of the illegal side of it and the demonization of them because of that? Why can they not be part of this legal and money-making profession, right? How come they can't be part of that?
Right.
One of the reasons they can't be part of that is because they have no exposure in terms of the sport itself, because where do you know where a professional dirt bike track is in Ohio?
Right.
In order to get to the closest one, you probably have to drive a couple of hours to get there, and that is just if you wanted to practice on one. So if you wanted to ride a dirt bike and do it in a legal way, you'd have to be able, if you living in an urban center, you'd have to be able to travel a couple of hours just to get to that, just to do, not to violate the law, right? And to get the experience you would need to obtain in order to be able to compete at the level to be able to win prizes, purses in the sport. Well, and be a professional. So to me, it was more about then how do I create that opportunity? How to create that opportunity for exposure to our young people of the professional side of this sport, as well as giving them a choice as to whether or not they were going to go here and be legitimate and legal, or they going to continue to do it over here in an illegal fashion. If they make the wrong choice, that's on them. So if them getting a ticket, getting arrested, their bikes getting towed, all this other kind of stuff, that's their decision then.
Right.
Because they now have an option to do it the right way and to learn professionally. It was no different than when people talked about these skateboard riders ride downtown and everywhere else, and they're out there and they jumping over whatever they're doing with skateboard. Well, they were complaining about that, but nobody complained when I spent almost $1 million building a skateboard track.
Right.
No one. The same thing when you go out in the community and these kids set up these basketball hoops in the middle of the street, and people complain about, the noise that they're making at nighttime and they got to sleep, or cars going up and down the street and they're saying there's a danger. Well, no one complained when we spent money to create a playground with basketball courts so they wouldn't have to do that, right? And so when kids are playing baseball in a vacant lot and they're hitting the ball and breaking out your window, and you mad because they broke out your front window and you got to replace it because they're playing baseball in a vacant lot, no one complained about the fact that we build them baseball diamonds, did they?
Right.
So what's this issue with dirt bikes? Yes, it is a more aggressive sport. It's more intimidating. and is a aggressive and an intimidating thing. But it's the same dynamic to me. You have to give young people the opportunity to make the right choice. Now let's follow up that a little bit more. Urban kids have developed their own sport now. It's trick riding, stunt riding. So they don't necessarily want to ride on dirt. So even if you build a dirt track, you're not necessarily going to get them to ride the dirt track, because that's not what thrills them. They like stunts. They like wheelies. They like standing. They like doing these tricks and things. So the other side of this we're doing is we're making available the opportunity for someone who wants to do special events on the weekend. Like we did a year ago in 2016, there was a gentleman who did a special event in the municipal parking lot where they had dirt bike riders came, and the municipal parking lot is paved, and all they did was do hours. I was down there, and for hours they went back and forth, just riding these dirt bikes, popping wheelies, four-wheelers popping wheelies. They even had the BMX bikes. They had a little spot over there for them, and they had these tricked out cars. They started coming down there. That's just in one day. People had a great time. So we're looking at how do we then give people options to do it the right way, as opposed to, and if they choose not to, that's on them. But also giving our young people exposure to a professional side. That we know about the dirt bike on the dirt. We know about X game tricks, right? Now we have a new urban sport, competitive sport around stunt and trick riding that people are now looking to do the circuit on that too. So we would want Cleveland to be a place where, if they were going to do that. So to me, I don't see the problem in investing money in young people who, just like I didn't see the problem in investing money in young people who were on skateboards or playing basketball on the street or baseball on the vacant lot. You know, I just don't see the difference in that aspect, even though I know it is much more aggressive and the dynamics of it is more intimidating to the average person.
Right. We're talking with Mayor Frank Jackson, and I know, Eric, you had a couple of public safety questions.
Yeah, so obviously in your tenure as mayor, the city has gone under a big transformation, a lot of improvements over the years, but unfortunately the crime rate and homicide rate is still kind of high, and the police department is understaffed. Now myself, I'm in the security field, and I've even contemplated getting into law enforcement, but doing some research, I noticed that the Cleveland Police Department is one of the lower paid given the crime rate in the area. Is there anything going forward that might entice these young men and women to come to Cleveland rather than a surrounding city or suburb?
Well, we're in collective bargaining, so you know what the contract says in regards to what we pay them and the benefits is part of collective bargaining. But there are people who we do lateral transfers of police officers who are in other cities who make more money than they make in Cleveland, and they gladly come over to Cleveland. We don't have a problem with people wanting to be Cleveland police officers, even with the pay scale we have now. People, they call Cleveland the real police, you know, and so we don't have that problem. We don't have that problem. Let me also mention, in terms of not enough police officers, we have more police officers per capita, and then a lot of other places when you're talking about urban centers, and in some reports will tell you we have more than is really necessary. Now, we don't necessarily believe that, because we have some things that we have to deal with particularly on the detectives, investigation, those kind of things where you need quicker follow-up to bring to conclusion some things that have happened out there as in part of the investigation. And our car plan, which is our 911 cars, the ones who answer 911 calls, we're not at the level that we believe we should be. So we're going to bring on additional police officers, and we're able to do that because of the passage of Issue 32, which is a 0.5% income tax increase. Before that, we were very limited in the number of police officers that we could have in totality, because it was a choice: do we close up rec centers to hire another 20 police officers? Well, that equation doesn't ring well.
It's tough.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't ring well.
Right.
And then on the other side of that, crime in Cleveland has actually gone down. Even the shootings have gone down. Felonious assaults have gone down. And I'll have to check with the chief, and you can get from LaToya the data on that and the stats on that. But I believe those kind of crimes have gone down. Homicides, however, are at a steady pace. And a lot of this has to do with the culture out on the street and the availability of guns. People you would probably not be surprised that there are homicides where both parties who got into a beef and shooting at each other have concealed carries. If you've gone to police academies, you know that there used to be a time when in order just to have a concealed carry license, you almost had to go through the whole state of POTA training. Now you go through one day of some simulation of something, go to a firing range and shoot a gun, and you get your license. So you really, so it's a whole different world now.
It's very lenient now.
It's very lenient.
How it is for people to get a CCW.
Right. So you can get a concealed carry now in one day, whereas before you had to take courses on this stuff.
Right. I took that course.
And you had to become proficient in the handling of the gun and all this other kind of stuff, and a very stringent background check. So part of our issue around violent crimes, particularly with guns, is associated with the availability of guns, and is also associated with that street culture. It's not even around drugs anymore. It used to be, you could, when crack and marijuana, and they had different little pockets of little groups that called themselves gangs. They were protecting their territory or their drug market. They beef with each other. Now you don't even have that. People go on Facebook and fall out and shoot each other.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's a whole different world that we're living in. That's why it's so important for us not only just to bring on police officers for the law enforcement side of those who just need to go to jail, but it's even more important for us to better educate our young people, to give our young people a stake in the system by having them have a job or a career path, or even better than that, own the system because you have wealth in regards to how that system operates. Those kind of things. That's why it's so important that we do those things. Crime is a symptom. It's just like a runny nose or a cough or sneezing. It is not the illness. Those are the symptoms of the illness. And what we tend to do is to treat the symptom by getting a cold medicine, which is police. The real cause of why and how we get sick is a whole different issue, which is more systemic to the operation of our social, economic, and political system. Mm-hmm. And that's a much harder nut to crack. And in order to make the kind of changes you need to make there, you will have to make decisions that are not easy in political decisions. That's what I'm talking about, they're getting over that hump. Mm-hmm. if we're truly going to be a great city, we have to resolve these systemic and structural disparities and inequity in our social, economic, and political systems. If we fail to do that, this stuff will just continue and it will get worse. I will tell you that if you go to parts of the world where they have what they call terrorism now, many of the people who were involved in those activities were street people who at one time were caught up in self-destruction, fighting with each other, who for whatever reason found that what they were doing in their minds was anti-productive for them and everything, but they found another enemy, which is the system. You go, particularly if you go into Europe and you find first and second generation people from the Middle East, and they were ghettoized, they were marginalized, they were involved in crime, they were involved in drugs, and they were involved in warring with each other and with gangs and stuff. And now what you find is those same groups wind up being against the government now. They're terrorists. Why? Because because we as not just a country, but I think worldwide, have not resolved those disparities and inequities that wind up producing the kind of individuals who would resort to either crime that is self-destructive or terrorism that is system destructive. And so we have to deal with that, and these are real challenges that we have to face if we're going to be successful. The better we meet those challenges, the more impact we'll have on crime. Of course, we need more police officers, and of course we have to deploy them in a way that addresses the immediacy of the problem, because our nose is running, we're coughing, right? We're sneezing, so we have to address that to be functional, right?
Right.
But that's not going to eliminate it. You know, once the medicine wear off, we're still sick.
Okay.
And that's why I believe. Now, finally, on the question you didn't ask, which I believe is very relevant, is the consent decree. The consent decree is, as you know, the Department of Justice came in and found a pattern and practice of constitutional violation by our Division of Police. I happen to believe that in the overall scheme of things, they're just like prosecutors who overcharge. So we were not completely the way in which they portrayed us to be. But we had some serious issues now. We had some serious issues that needed to be changed. The consent decree, for me, I welcome, because we were doing things around the use of force, the enforcement of law in a constitutional way or by a free way. We were doing that, but we were doing it incrementally and individually. And as you know, when you do things that way, the shelf life, it's not sustainable because it's not supported. It's just out there by itself. The consent decree really gives us a real blueprint and a strategic approach to real reform. It really does. And that's why I believe in the consent decree. And that's why I believe that the consent decree will help us as a city to be more accountable and responsible to the citizens in terms of in law enforcement, because we are urban environment, which means there needs to be aggressive enforcement, but it has to be done in a bias-free manner, in a constitutional manner, in a professional manner. It can't be done in this cowboy kind of approach to life. It can't be done that way. And that's about the relationship between the community and the Division of Police. And depending on what part of the city you go to, they welcome the police as servants, and you go somewhere else and they look at them as occupying. See, so you got different mentalities here. But what this does, it gives us the ability to do real reform that is not only has substance to it, but is sustainable beyond the legal consent agreement. There's been, I cannot, and maybe you can find one, I cannot find a city that has been under a consent decree that once that consent decree is over with, that they have not reverted back to doing the same thing. Right? Why? Because there is no substantive cultural change in the behavior of how that police division functions and behaves. What we want and what we view success is that once the legal side of the agreement, the consent decree, is over with, and we're no longer under it and released by the Department of Justice, that we have put in place the substantive and sustainable cultural changes and procedures and process that will allow for a different outcome that exists beyond the legal requirement. So we just don't want to check the box.
Right.
We wanted to have some substance to it as we move forward. That is more important in terms of helping to reduce the crime as you hire more, better training, more cultural competency, having people who look more like the people who served the community that they're in, and also even if they don't look like the people of the community they serve, that they have an understanding of that culture, that urban culture, in a way that they don't view everybody in that culture or every act of that aggressive culture to be a threat to them. Because, a lot of times they're just scared.
Right.
And when you come to a situation you're scared, you automatically in an elevated posture. And the only thing you can do next is draw a gun.
Right.
See, whereas if you understand the culture that you're serving and you look at it as serving, then you just recognize that even though it may be an aggressive culture, that there really that ain't nothing happening there. Right. But if you don't understand that, it can be very challenging.
Absolutely.
Once again, we're speaking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. A moment ago, you had mentioned the need for cultural change. Sometimes it seems like there is a disconnect between the community and the Division of Police. Are there any plans going forward to maybe lessen that disconnect, maybe any community meetings where the police department can meet with some of the community members or anything like that going forward?
Well, yes, that's just basic. What you're saying is basic. That should happen, and it should happen on a more frequent basis. But what we want to add to that is beyond the consent decree, we're looking at finding cultural competency in selecting who goes into the police academy. We had by law, we had to pick 1 and 3. So there's 3 of us. They picked me. They passed the 2 of you over. So if we're going to pick somebody going to take this one slot in this academy, you're number 1, you're number 2, I'm number 3. For whatever reason, they pass the 2 of you over. They come to me as number 3. They pick me, so I get the seat. You don't go off the list. You go to the next seat, meaning that when they choose the next person, then you in that lineup too. It'll get to the point that all 3 candidates are not really candidates that they may want to have, but by law they have to pick one of them. So they wind up picking somebody even though they would prefer not to have them. What we've done, we've changed that charter to the point that now we can do 1 and 10. What does that give us the ability to do? It gives us the ability to go deeper into the list, because everyone who can do the job does not necessarily test good. So you have to evaluate, can they do this job? Not just based on the test, but based on other indicators and factors. It allows us to go deeper into the list so we can pick a more diverse person to go into that seat, whether they're by race, ethnicity, gender, and even more important in some cases is whether or not they understand that urban culture. Mm-hmm. And that person could be white, black, Hispanic, Asian, it doesn't matter. If they understand their culture, they are more likely to make the right decision when confronted with an adverse situation. Mm-hmm. So those are the kind of things when I talk about cultural change and cultural competency. You're right. To have the division and the men and women be more community police oriented with the understanding that this is an urban environment and they have to do urban policing, but to have them understand who they're serving is always a better thing. Having more meetings, having more understanding between the two so they know that they're not enemies and things like that. Part of that whole dirt bike thing, because the way it's set up now is that every dirt bike rider and policeman is a mortal enemy. They're mortal enemies. Whereas if you create a situation of choice and opportunity to do something different, then that creates a whole different dynamic. Right? And so it's the same thing. So yes, we need more interaction, we need more meetings, but we also have to structurally and in our process have a better selection in choices and picking, and we're doing that also, and those two things will better line up to get a better outcome.
We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson. We don't want to keep you too much longer. We know you have a lot of other things to do. But one of the things that you talked about earlier was about education reform.
Right.
And so I wanted to dig into that a little bit. I think no fair observer can deny that the schools have improved. We see it in statistics. We see it in enrollment is up and all that kind of things. But some people feel like the schools aren't improving fast enough or that it hasn't spread far enough. So what is the next step to improve the school system?
Well, I happen to agree with the people who say that it should be improving at a more rapid pace. I happen to agree with that. But you have to remember now, this is just for 5 years, this reform been in place. This has been decades of a problem, decades. I can remember when, the graduation rate was less than 50%. When 5 years ago, it was around 50%. Now it's 72%. Well, even 72% is an F. So even though we're making significant strides, it's still an F. And what we've found is we have some schools, there's some of the best schools in the state of Ohio, whether they're K-8 or high schools, they're some of the best in Ohio. We have some schools that people who live in suburban school district are enrolling their kids into particular schools like Campus International or John Hay because of the quality of that education and the expertise that they teach there. So we have all this going on, but as a system, we're still an F. The Say Yes for Education program is something that we're hanging a lot of that future of a more rapid increase for a larger number of children to occur.
And for people that don't know what that is.
Say Yes for Education is a program that I think is in Buffalo and Syracuse, and I hear is doing well there, where you have a child who demonstrates some problem in their ability to learn. Now, this is not a child who has some learning disability or a child that has some physical thing associated or mental thing associated with their ability to learn. This is a child that for whatever reason, they're not learning. and that could be something that's happening with them personally, in their family, out in the community. We have all kinds of social service agencies and programs and initiatives going on, but they're not in collaboration or coordinated with each other. And so a lot of time that child is just overlooked or fall through the crack. What this Say Yes for Education does, it comes in and it creates an infrastructure of all the social service activity, all of the nonprofit activity around whatever the challenges may be that the child may be dealing with. And as that child is identified as having this barrier to their ability to learn that is not genetic or mental in any way, but just a social thing going on. This Say Yes for Education is supposed to take that child, do this wraparound with that child, the family, and do some interaction outside of the school that will allow for that barrier to come down, so that child can either catch up, because catching up is one of the major problems that our young people have. If a kid is having a problem in the 3rd grade and they didn't learn to read right, and here they are in the 7th grade and they still reading at the 3rd grade level, it's not going to be easy for them to deal with high school stuff, right? And so the catching up is a major issue. It's a major issue. And so what does that child do in that regard? Are they going to just say, I'm stupid? I got an IEP. I'm in special ed. And then when they get there, they don't challenge them. They just do babysitting, right? So that's got to change. That has to change. And if that child is able to learn, then those barriers have to be removed. And wherever they are in that learning process, they have to go back and teach them so that they can get in that caught-up mode, which means there has to be initiative from the child and support of the family. All this is outside the school. Because what happens in that building is completely different than what happens outside that building. But what happens outside that building is always carried inside the building. And if there's some dysfunctionality or some barriers or some things that are inhibiting their ability to learn, we have to address that. That is what the Say Yes for Education program is about. It's about collaboration, coordination of all of the activities designed to assist individuals and families in regards to helping their child learn, to get rid of those barriers.
We're talking with Cleveland Mayor Frank Jackson, and once again, Mayor, I want to thank you so much for spending time with us, for being generous with your time as well. And just to kind of switch things up a little bit and to lighten it up a little bit for my last question, I just have to ask you: is there anything that you can do about the Browns?
No, that's that's one of them things that you just have to deal with as time goes on. The interesting things about the Browns. When we got the Browns back after that 3 years or so layoff, and we made the deal with the NFL, Mayor Michael White did that, and then he built the stadium. I think that was about, a 3-year process or whatever.
And you were a councilman at the time.
I was a councilman at the time. And most of those would be considered expansion teams, right? Even though we kept the color and the name. Right. It was really an expansion team. So we had some of the same privileges that expansion team had. I think we're one of the very few, if any, expansion team that has not yet gone to the Super Bowl, right? Right? And so there's something going on there. I don't know what it is, because that's not my world. That's not my world, football. I do know that the thing I noticed most about this year is that I didn't recognize one name. One name. At least I would recognize from year to year somebody. I didn't recognize one name, and even though I know there were some people carried over from last year.
They're the youngest team in the league, right?
Yes, they
yeah.
are.
Yeah, and probably have a lot of potential, but you got to hold on to the ball. You got
You got to catch the ball.
Yeah, you got a young quarterback who obviously has some talent.
Yeah.
But somebody got to catch the ball. Yeah, and then somebody has to block.
Right.
And and in football, it is about the nuts and bolts. It's not about the glit and the glamour. It's about the nuts and the bolt, because it's a real team sport.
Right.
And everyone has a role to play. Even though basketball and baseball are team sports, you don't operate it in a synchronized way like you do in football. I like this, the quarterback got sacked. They had to take him out for some time. Well, the tight end missed the block.
Right.
David Njoku missed the block for Deshaun Kaiser.
He knew it too, right? He knew oh crap! He knew he missed his block. He knew and he's fortunate that the cornerback was a clean hit. He could have did a dirty hit, or he'd have been finished for the season.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
He'd have been. So there's nothing I can do about the Browns. They're gonna have to work their own stuff out. But I don't claim. I don't just like I don't claim responsibility for failure. I don't claim credit for their success either. The Cavaliers did their thing.
Yes.
And even though I was mayor and I participated in the parade, I had nothing to do with that either. The Cleveland Indians went to the this year they went into the playoffs. Last year they went to the World Series, did quite well. And even though I'm the mayor, I don't claim credit for that either. So there's something that's going on within the organizations that causes these things to happen.
Well, I hope you know, if you were able to get with Jimmy and Dee Haslam and get them on a winning record, you'd be mayor for life.
One thing I would say about the Haslam, they want to win.
Oh, absolutely.
They want to win, and as opposed to, there was some question previously as to whether or not
that it mattered or not.
Right, whether it mattered. This ownership, they really do want to win. What do you think with the coach now? Of course, the coach is always the one blamed. They're the one praised or fired.
Absolutely.
And in a normal situation, 2 years of what has occurred would cause the coach to get fired. What do you think? You think he just You think he just...
I think he's made some mistakes, but I don't think it's all his fault. I mean, they tore the team down.
Yeah, it's a new team.
Yeah, they stripped it bare.
Right.
So I mean, he can only do so much. He's made some mistakes.
And he made some calls that, if they were successful, he would be looking like a genius.
Exactly.
But that's such as the fate of life.
Right. But you know how it is in leadership, right? Everybody
That's
wants to blame you.
Well, old folks say you pay the cost to be the boss.
Right.
That's why I think it falls on the front office and not the coach.
You always you pay the cost to be the boss.
Thank you so much, Mayor,
Thank
for
you.
spending time with us.
Thank
we really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.